Hello. Well, I'm not sure I can impress you with my story. You've heard so many heart-wrenching and really dramatic stories here. My problem is more mundane and concrete. I'm an 18-year-old girl named Matilda, and I have a beard. That's the way the cookie crumbles. The hair on my face began to grow when I was 11 years old. At first it was a thick, dark fluff. Then the hair began to get thicker and more noticeable. There wasn't really much of it, and I thought that it wasn't something to worry about. But one day my mother put me under a lamp, meticulously examined my face, and concluded that it was ugly, and that I had to do something with it before my schoolmates started calling me a hairy monkey. When we had dinner that night, my mother brought up this subject again, telling my stepfather, "I have news. My daughter has a beard. It's damn puberty, so until she outgrows it, she will have to remove this fur." He replied, "Sure, if I were a boy, I would run screaming from a girl like that, or start throwing rocks at her." I sat at the dinner table quietly, red as a tomato, with my eyes looking down at my plate. You probably now think, why didn't her parents take her to a doctor? Well, my mother was absolutely sure that this was a temporary problem associated with the hormonal storms stirring inside my body. When I timidly asked her if I should maybe talk about it with our school nurse, she angrily answered, "Of course, go and tell everybody what a freak you are. Maybe they will feel pity for you and even make you into their own personal carnival show." I think that in reality my mother was simply upset that her daughter had such an abnormal problem, and that was why she told me all these hurtful things. Once I heard her saying to my stepfather that she prefers that I hear it from her rather than from a crowd of people who were laughing at me. And my mother put all her energy into helping me in this fierce struggle with the hair on my face. There was more and more of it, and when the tweezers became insufficient, wax strips and depilation creams were used. All of this made me really uncomfortable and was even painful. I had sensitive, baby-soft skin, which was now constantly covered with a terrible acne. But my mother was stubborn. She believed it would be better for me if everybody laughed at my acne, rather than have them see that I was an abnormal freak and start avoiding me. But to be honest, they avoided me anyway. When I finished elementary school and went to middle school, the girls there didn't want to be friends with this pimpled Tilda. But the fact was that I personally was not really eager to seek the company of other people. I was shy and also afraid that someone would notice that something was seriously wrong with me. But there was one exception. His name was Chris, and we have been friends since elementary school. We never played like boyfriend-girlfriend, nothing like that. We were just buddies. But when we grew up, he began to treat me, well, in a more and more chivalrous manner. I was very confused. In addition, he was worried about my skin problems and kept asking me about them all the time. He even dug up information about acne and tried to give me some advice. He wasn't being impolite, you see. We were friends from childhood, and we were still children. But I didn't tell him about my real problem. Once, I told my mother that Chris read something about a homemade lotion for sensitive skin and asked her if we could make it at home. In response, my mum gave me a tongue lashing. "Why is this boy always hanging around with you?" She screamed that if he found out that I had a beard like a goat, do I really think that he wouldn't tell everybody about it? She demanded that I stay away from him, and I was so frightened that as soon as we saw each other the next time, I told Chris some terrible things, yelled at him, and he stopped communicating. 5 years have passed since then. I grew up. Contrary to my mother's assumptions, nothing has changed. My beard is still growing, but I've gotten used to it. Now I just shave several times a day and use a thick foundation to make the skin on my face look smooth. Mum had nothing to do with it. I myself was scared to death that somebody would notice something, so I just lived, trying not to get too far away from a bathroom where I kept my safety razor. I was chained to it. But people only saw a pretty girl, and I somehow got a boyfriend, Jerry. When I would just see him for a few hours a day, everything was fine. I had to shave right before I went to see him, but our relationship evolved, and Jerry introduced me to his parents. They seemed to like me and invited us both to spend the weekend at their country house. It was so sweet that I almost said yes right away. But then I remembered something and rather awkwardly mumbled that I needed to ask permission from my parents. As if just out of curiosity, I asked Jerry about their country house, and I found out that there was a guest room with a separate bathroom. Everything was under control. I was going to call Jerry later and confirm that I would gladly accept their invitation, but when I told my mother about this, she, as always, started telling me that this was a very big risk, that I had to understand that if Jerry found out about my beard, he would dump me. I was so upset that I called Jerry and was going to tell him that I couldn't go, but he took it very coldly and said that I absolutely had to accept his invitation if I didn't want to put him in an awkward and stupid position in front of his parents. And, nothing unexpected happened during that weekend. I mean, nothing that my mother would not expect. In the evening when we arrived, everything was fine. And the next morning, while I was in the bathroom, Jerry came into the room with a breakfast tray. Probably his mother advised him to make such an old-fashioned romantic gesture. And right at that moment, I left the bathroom for a split second. I forgot to get the lotion from my bag. My face was covered in foam, and I was holding a razor in my hand. Well, Jerry was able to overcome the shock, but not the squeamishness. I hope that at least he tried. However, he accused me of hiding such a huge problem from him and said that his parents would never be able to accept it, and that we should break up, preferably after the weekend, so as not to spoil his parents' good time, and that I needed to cover all of this up better and behave cheerfully so that they didn't notice anything. I think you'll be glad to hear that I told him to go straight to hell. I called a taxi and left without caring to apologise to Jerry's parents. But this didn't mean that I was such a tough cookie. I returned home with my tail between my legs, completely ruined. And at home, of course, I could not escape my mother's inquiries and her almost triumphant exclamations. I told you, I warned you, what a shame, what a tragedy. I was already at my limit, and I could no longer listen to all of this, so I literally ran away from home. Actually, I didn't care where I was going, but not enough to do something stupid or put myself in danger. I think you can understand me, that all I needed was to talk to somebody about this. I never had a close friend, except for maybe, do you remember Chris? Now I realise that after all these years, I never forgot what he told me when I yelled that he should get out of my life. He said, if you need me, one day, any time. And I went straight to Chris. When he saw me and realised what a state I was in, he took everything very seriously. But when he asked what happened and how he could help, I started laughing. What kind of help could I ask from him? A magic razor? And then I burst into tears and told him everything, including my terrible secret. Chris was shocked, and his reaction was very stormy. But to my surprise, it was anger. Anger at Jerry and at my parents. He began to ask me what the cause was of my problem, what treatment had we tried, and why it didn't help. And I realised that I had never thought of my problem as a medical one, perceiving it as an external defect, as an ugliness. It was a shocking discovery, but what surprised me even more was that my beard alone left Chris indifferent. I asked how he would have behaved in Jerry's place. Chris said that he had been shaving since he was 14 and that he saw only one problem, and that was how to share the bathroom mirror in the morning if your girlfriend needed to shave too. My story is coming to an end. Within a month after this conversation, I told my parents that I was moving in with Chris. When I told them that he knew all about my feature, I wasn't referring it to a problem anymore. My mother called him an abnormal deviant, and my stepfather added that he wouldn't be surprised if this Chris would do something bad to me. And I know that it was not a nice thing to do, but I also told them to go to hell, just like Jerry. But this time, I really felt like a tough cookie. What more can I say? With the support of Chris, I started some medical treatment. And although it is impossible in my case to completely get rid of the hair, it has become much thinner. And most importantly, I have ceased to consider myself a freak. I found out there were many women with this feature, and some of them even openly wear their beards. Well, I'm not ready for that yet. I continue to shave. And my main problem is to have to share the bathroom mirror with Chris in the morning.
Hi, my name is Andrea, and I'd like to tell you how costly, literally and figuratively, injustice and lack of honesty can be. But first of all, I have to tell you something about my family. A long time ago, my great-grandfather built an enormous 3-story house, which was supposed to be a family nest, just like an aristocratic estate in the South. My great-grandfather managed to keep his riches during the Great Depression, so my grandfather, and later on my father, inherited both the house and the traditions. I hope that when the time comes, I will live here with my own family. The house is really huge, and so is the garden surrounding it, and my father hires people to help us with all of this. The gardener who creates masterpieces from ordinary plants, the cook who makes dinners and leaves food for the next day in the fridge, and the housekeeper. Our current housekeeper's name is Julia. Somebody has to pay all these bills, so my dad spends almost all of his time in the office, coming home late for dinner and sometimes not even coming home at all. I miss him very much, but I understand why this happens. My mom does not have to go to work, but this in no way means that I get to see her more often. Even though our town is small, we have many activities that my mom always takes part in. And if there's some kind of family drama, my mom will always be in the middle, calming, listening, and encouraging. All the housewives in our town share their secrets with her, and no contest like the most beautiful rose in town would dare be held without her. So I often stay home with just Julia, who's completely silent. But I seldom feel lonely. My huge house is not as empty as you might think, and it's never looked depressing to me. It has a complicated and well-thought-out interior, full of beautiful things. Vases, jewel caskets, ashtrays, though my father doesn't smoke, different figurines, stones, and other souvenirs collected by the 3 generations of my family. And from very early childhood, I've liked to sort them out. Nobody else's house has so many amazing and sometimes very expensive things, and I always felt proud to experience such an out-of-the-ordinary way of life in my home. That's why I noticed immediately when the letter opener and the ivory owl statuette disappeared from the table in the library. Well, the library is very large, so these things could easily have fallen on the floor and gotten lost during cleaning, so I just called the housekeeper and asked her to look for them during her next cleaning. For some reason, Julia looked worried and nervous, as if I ordered her to find the souvenirs immediately. But she is quite an emotional person, so I decided not to correct her and returned to what I was doing. But the story has only just begun. A week later, an antique forged ashtray disappeared from the living room. It was strange. I looked under the tea tables and sofas, kneeling on the floor in my dress, but could not find it. Then I remembered the souvenirs from the library and went to see if they were found. No. Okay, these things were really small and could have rolled somewhere under the shelves, but the ashtray was really big and heavy and couldn't just be smashed away. So where did it go? Was it stolen? My parents did not seem to notice the losses, and I decided not to upset them and tried to figure out who had come into our home lately. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that no one new had visited us. Maybe somebody from the house staff. The gardener never enters the big house. The cook only works in the evenings and seldom leaves the kitchen. So that just leaves Julia. She lives in the house, she has her own room, and also she has access to every room. So I started my own investigation. Like Sherlock Holmes, I followed Julia in disguise. I examined every room before and after cleaning, trying to catch her in the act when she stole something again. I was contemplating telling everything to my parents, but, I did not want to look reactive or intolerant by blaming Julia without any proof. But after that, a really valuable thing disappeared. A passe-part out with a postcard signed for my great-grandfather by one of the Golden Age Hollywood stars. It was a family relic, and it just vanished. It was too much. So, when we all had a family dinner and Julia came to help with the dishes, I told my parents everything. My father was devastated. My mother kept silent, and Julia was terrified. Of course, my dad asked for some explanations, but she only shook her head and repeated that she did not take anything. My father announced that she was fired, and Julia ran out in tears. For almost half an hour, my father was loudly trying to figure out if it was really Julia's fault. Finally, he came to the conclusion that she was the only person who could would steal the valuables and decided to call the police. And all of a sudden, my mother broke her silence and said that Julia was innocent. It was her who was throwing away this old garbage, trashing them one by one. In less than a minute, she started yelling that she was fed up with living in my father's family museum, which costs a fortune to keep, and that she was suffocating in all this junk. And even though I was very curious to find out what my father would say to her when he returned to life from being a speechless statue, I rushed to Julia's room in order to ask for her forgiveness from my whole family. When I was descending